Welcome to this AB-900 long-form practice exam for Microsoft 365 Copilot and Agent Administration. This session gives you 50 exam-style questions across Microsoft 365 services, Purview data protection, Copilot administration, and agent governance. Treat it like a focused practice run. Read the scenario, make a decision, and use the explanation to strengthen your exam instincts. For each question, I will read the scenario and answer choices. Then, the video will hold a 3-second silent countdown. Use that silence to pause if you need more time. Commit to your answer, and then continue for the reveal. After the reveal, we will briefly explain why the answer is correct and call out the exam clue that helps you spot the pattern. Question 1. A company is creating a project workspace where employees need Teams conversations, standard channels, and shared files that are stored in Microsoft 365. An administrator wants to understand which Microsoft 365 objects are involved before assigning permissions. Which statement best describes the relationship between these objects? A. An Exchange distribution list is the main workspace object. It automatically creates Teams channels and a SharePoint document library for collaboration. B. A SharePoint library is the main membership object. Adding users to the library automatically creates the team, channels, and Teams policies. C. A team provides the collaboration workspace with channels, and the team's files are stored in a connected SharePoint site and libraries, while membership controls access. D. A team's policy is the main storage object. It stores channel files and determines which SharePoint folders are created for each user. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. A team provides the collaboration workspace with channels, and the team's files are stored in a connected SharePoint site and libraries, while membership controls access. A Microsoft team is the collaboration workspace. It contains channels for conversation and uses a connected SharePoint site and document libraries for files. Access is controlled through membership and permissions, not by treating files, policies, or distribution lists as the whole workspace. Exam clue. For AB-900 object map questions, separate the collaboration workspace from the file storage location and the policy/admin control. Teams handles team channel collaboration. SharePoint stores files, and policies/admin centers govern behavior. Question 2. A legal department stores contracts in SharePoint and emails draft agreements to internal reviewers. The organization wants a Microsoft Purview control that can apply a visible classification, such as confidential, and can also help enforce protection settings, such as encryption or access restrictions for labeled content. Which Microsoft Purview capability best fits this requirement? A. Retention labels. B. Sensitivity labels. C. Communication compliance policies. D. Content search and eDiscovery. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Sensitivity labels. Sensitivity labels are used to classify and protect content such as documents and emails. They can provide visible classification markings and can be configured with protection settings such as encryption and access restrictions. Exam clue. When the requirement says classify and protect content, think sensitivity labels. When the requirement says keep or delete content, think retention. When it says find content for an investigation, think eDiscovery/content search. Question 3. A company has purchased Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses for a pilot group. The IT administrator needs to make Copilot available only to the employees in that pilot group before expanding access more broadly. What should the administrator do first? A. Create a custom agent for the pilot group and publish it to the organization. B. Assign the Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the pilot users or to a group that contains those users. C. Create a communication compliance policy that includes the pilot users. D. Configure content search in Microsoft Purview eDiscovery for the pilot users' mailboxes and SharePoint sites. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Assign the Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the pilot users or to a group that contains those users. Microsoft 365 Copilot availability depends on the user being licensed and meeting the required service prerequisites. For a pilot rollout, the administrator should assign Copilot licenses directly to the pilot users or use group-based licensing for the pilot group. Exam clue. For Copilot rollout questions, separate licensing/access from governance, monitoring, and agent creation. If the requirement is to make Copilot available to a defined set of users, start with license assignment to those users or their group. Question 4. A help desk analyst is reviewing a Microsoft 365 Access issue. The user can prove who they are by completing multi-factor authentication, but they still cannot open a restricted SharePoint site. Which two statements correctly explain the difference between authentication and authorization in this scenario? A. Authorization replaces the need for MFA when the user already belongs to a Microsoft 365 group. B. Authentication confirms the user's identity, such as by password, MFA, or single sign-on. C. Authentication assigns the SharePoint site role that allows the user to edit documents. D. Authorization determines whether the authenticated user has permission to access the SharePoint site or resource. E. Authentication and authorization are the same control, because both are configured only through Microsoft Purview. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Authentication confirms the user's identity, such as by password, MFA, or single sign-on. D. Authorization determines whether the authenticated user has permission to access the SharePoint site or resource. Authentication verifies identity, such as signing in with a password, MFA, or SSO. Authorization determines what the signed-in user is allowed to access or do, such as whether the user has permission to open a SharePoint site. Exam clue. If the question asks who the user is, think authentication. If it asks what the signed-in user can access or do, think authorization. Question 5. A company is preparing to roll out Microsoft 365 Copilot. The administrator is concerned that users may receive Copilot responses based on SharePoint files that they are technically allowed to access, but that were overshared to broad groups years ago. Proposed solution. Create a Microsoft Purview DLP policy that detects sensitive information in files and sends alerts when policy matches occur. Does the proposed solution fully address the administrator's oversharing concern? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. No. The DLP policy can help detect and alert on sensitive information, but it does not by itself fix broad SharePoint permissions or identify every overshared site, library, or file that Copilot could surface to users who already have access. To address the oversharing concern, the administrator also needs to review and remediate SharePoint access, such as by using SharePoint Data Access Governance reports and permission cleanup. Exam clue. For Copilot oversharing questions, remember that Copilot respects existing Microsoft 365 permissions. If the problem is too many people already have access, a detection policy alone does not clean up SharePoint access. Question 6. A department wants a repeatable assistant that follows department-specific instructions, uses approved internal knowledge sources, and helps employees complete a recurring onboarding workflow. Which option best fits this requirement? A. Ask employees to use Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat and paste the department's onboarding instructions into each conversation when they need help. B. Create a custom agent with saved instructions, approved knowledge sources, and access scoped to the intended users. C. Share a saved Copilot prompt with the department so employees can reuse the same starting instructions in Copilot Chat. D. Enable Copilot for the department by assigning licenses, then rely on each user's existing Microsoft 365 permissions to produce the onboarding workflow. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create a custom agent with saved instructions, approved knowledge sources, and access scoped to the intended users. A custom agent is designed for a repeatable, scoped experience. It can be configured with saved instructions, approved knowledge sources, and user access, so employees get consistent help for a defined department workflow. Exam clue. If the requirement is a repeatable assistant with saved instructions, approved knowledge, scoped users, and lifecycle management, think custom agent. If the option only gives users Copilot access or a reusable prompt, it is probably not enough. Question 7. Match each administrator task to the most appropriate Microsoft 365 admin area. A. SharePoint Admin Center. B. Microsoft Entra Admin Center. C. Exchange Admin Center. D. Teams Admin Center. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are 1. C. Exchange Admin Center. 2. D. Teams Admin Center. 3. B. Microsoft Entra Admin Center. 4. A. SharePoint Admin Center. Exchange Admin Center is used for mailboxes and distribution lists. Teams Admin Center is used for teams, channels, and teams policies. Microsoft Entra Admin Center is used for identity work, such as users, groups, authentication methods, and risky sign-ins. SharePoint Admin Center is used for sites, libraries, and site permissions. Exam clue. For AB-900 object map questions, identify the object first. Mailbox or distribution list maps to Exchange. Team, channel, or Teams policy maps to Teams. Users, groups, and sign-ins map to Entra. Site, library, or site permission maps to SharePoint. Question 8. A sales manager asks Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize recent activity for an account, including relevant emails, meetings, Teams conversations, and files that the manager can access. What role does Microsoft Graph play in this response? A. It gives Copilot a tenant-wide administrator view, so the response can include all account-related content, even files and chats the manager cannot open directly. B. It helps Copilot use Microsoft 365 data and relationships, such as mail, meetings, chats, people, and files, while respecting the signed-in user's permissions. C. It stores approved Copilot prompts as a department knowledge base, so every user receives the same response for the same account. D. It replaces SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams permissions with a separate Copilot access list created by the administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. It helps Copilot use Microsoft 365 data and relationships, such as mail, meetings, chats, people, and files, while respecting the signed-in user's permissions. Microsoft Graph provides access to Microsoft 365 data and relationships across services such as mail, calendar, Teams, SharePoint, and people. Copilot can use that organizational context for grounding, but it remains constrained by the signed-in user's permissions and access scope. Exam clue. For AB-900, Microsoft Graph is the organizational data and relationship layer that helps ground Copilot responses. It is not an admin bypass, prompt library, or replacement permission system. Question 9. An organization wants to allow Microsoft 365 Copilot for a pilot group, but it does not want users in that pilot to access a specific Copilot experience that the tenant administrator can control separately. What should the administrator use to manage whether that Copilot experience is available? A. Remove the Microsoft 365 Copilot license from the pilot users until the organization is ready to enable every Copilot experience for them. B. Use the supported Copilot feature setting, app setting, or admin policy that controls that specific experience. C. Create a custom agent with instructions telling users not to use the restricted Copilot experience. D. Change the pilot group's SharePoint permissions so Copilot cannot ground responses in files connected to that experience. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Use the supported Copilot feature setting, app setting, or admin policy that controls that specific experience. If a Copilot experience can be enabled or disabled separately, the administrator should use the supported feature setting, app setting, or admin policy for that experience. This controls availability without unnecessarily removing the entire Copilot license or relying on indirect workarounds. Exam clue. For feature availability questions, look for the supported admin setting or policy for that specific Copilot experience. Licensing controls whether users can use Copilot broadly. Permissions control what data Copilot can access. Neither is the best tool for a separately controllable feature. Question 10. A company wants to require multi-factor authentication when users access Microsoft 365 from unmanaged devices. Proposed solution. Create a Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy that targets the required users and cloud apps, checks the device condition, and requires multi-factor authentication. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Yes. Conditional access policies can evaluate sign-in conditions such as user, app, device state, location, or risk, and then require controls such as multi-factor authentication. A policy that targets the right users and apps, checks unmanaged device conditions, and requires MFA meets this requirement. Exam clue. For sign-in enforcement questions, look for conditional access when the requirement combines a condition, such as device or location, with an access control, such as MFA or block access. Question 11. A company is preparing Microsoft 365 Copilot for a broad rollout. The security team wants to reduce the risk that Copilot responses expose sensitive files to users who should not have access. Which two controls are most directly relevant to reducing this risk? A. Limit Copilot rollout to a pilot group while leaving existing SharePoint site and file permissions unchanged. B. Use Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels and DLP policies to help classify, protect, and detect sensitive content. C. Turn off prompt sharing so users cannot reuse prompts that mention sensitive projects. D. Review and correct SharePoint site, library, and file permissions before rollout. E. Rely on Copilot license assignment to prevent users from seeing content they can already access in Microsoft 365. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Use Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels and DLP policies to help classify, protect, and detect sensitive content. D. Review and correct SharePoint site, library, and file permissions before rollout. Microsoft Purview controls such as sensitivity labels and DLP help classify, protect, and detect sensitive content, reducing governance risk around sensitive information. Copilot respects existing Microsoft 365 permissions, so SharePoint site, library, and file permissions should be reviewed and corrected before rollout. Exam clue. For Copilot data risk questions, combine permission cleanup with Purview governance controls. Pilot scope, prompt sharing, and licensing can matter, but they do not replace fixing access and protecting sensitive content. Question 12. A marketing director needs help comparing recent campaign performance, identifying trends in the data, and explaining which campaign segments are underperforming. The director wants an experience focused on analyzing structured business data rather than collecting broad research from web and work sources. Which Copilot capability is the best fit? A. Researcher, because it can gather and synthesize information from work and web sources into a research-style report. B. A custom agent, because it is the best fit when the organization needs a managed, repeatable assistant with configured instructions and approved knowledge sources for a specific workflow. C. Analyst, because it is designed to help analyze data, identify patterns, and explain insights. D. A saved prompt, because reusing the same prompt is the primary way to turn Copilot into a structured data analysis experience. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Analyst, because it is designed to help analyze data, identify patterns, and explain insights. Analyst is the best fit when the user needs help analyzing data, spotting patterns, and explaining insights. The STEM points to structured performance data and trend analysis, not broad research synthesis or a managed custom workflow assistant. Exam clue. For AB-900, think researcher equals research and synthesis, analyst equals data analysis and insights, custom agent equals managed repeatable assistant, and saved prompt equals reusable starting instruction, not a full capability replacement. Question 13. A user reports that they cannot sign in to Microsoft 365 after an MFA prompt. The administrator needs to troubleshoot the issue without immediately changing security policies. Arrange the actions in the best order. A. Adjust the relevant authentication method, conditional access policy, or user/risk setting if the evidence shows a misconfiguration. B. Review the user's recent sign-in events and failure details in Microsoft Entra. C. Ask the user to try signing in again after the targeted fix. D. Confirm whether MFA, conditional access, or risk-based controls were applied to the failed sign-in. E. Identify the specific failure reason and affected condition before changing configuration. Lock in your answer. The correct order is 1. B. Review the user's recent sign-in events and failure details in Microsoft Entra. 2. D. Confirm whether MFA, conditional access, or risk-based controls were applied to the failed sign-in. 3. E. Identify the specific failure reason and affected condition before changing configuration. 4. A. Adjust the relevant authentication method, conditional access policy, or user/risk setting if the evidence shows a misconfiguration. 5. C. Ask the user to try signing in again after the targeted fix. Start by reviewing the sign-in evidence. Then, identify which controls were applied to the failed sign-in. Use the failure reason and condition to decide whether a configuration change is actually needed. Only then make a targeted fix and have the user test again. Exam clue. For sign-in troubleshooting, read the sign-in evidence first. Identify the applied control and failure reason, then make the smallest targeted fix. Question 14. A records manager wants Microsoft 365 to keep certain project documents for 7 years and then delete them automatically after the retention period ends. Which Microsoft Purview capability best fits this requirement? A. Sensitivity labels. B. Retention labels and policies. C. Communication compliance policies. D. Data loss prevention policies. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Retention labels and policies. Retention labels and retention policies are used to manage the lifecycle of content. They can keep content for a required period and then delete it, trigger a disposition review, or take another configured retention action after the retention period. Exam clue. If the requirement says keep content for a period, then delete or review it, think retention labels or retention policies. If it says classify and protect, think sensitivity labels. If it says detect sensitive data, think DLP. Question 15. A department is creating a custom agent for internal policy questions. The agent should answer from approved HR policy files and should only be available to members of the HR operations group. Which two configuration choices are most directly required? A. Configure the agent with the approved HR policy knowledge source. B. Turn on prompt scheduling so the agent sends recurring policy summaries to all employees. C. Scope the agent's access or availability to the intended HR operations users or group. D. Remove Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses from users outside the HR operations group. E. Create a Microsoft Purview retention policy for the HR files before the agent can answer questions. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A. Configure the agent with the approved HR policy knowledge source. C. Scope the agent's access or availability to the intended HR operations users or group. The agent needs an approved knowledge source so it can answer from the intended HR policy content. The agent's availability or access should also be scoped to the intended users or group so it is not broadly available to the wrong audience. Exam clue. For custom agent setup questions, look for two things: what the agent is allowed to use as knowledge and who is allowed to access or use the agent. Licensing, prompt scheduling, and retention can matter elsewhere, but they are not the direct agent configuration pair here. Question 16. A company uses group-based licensing for Microsoft 365. A user is added to the Copilot pilot group, but the user still cannot access Microsoft 365 Copilot. Other members of the same group can access Copilot. The administrator confirms that the group is assigned Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses, but the license assignment report shows an error for this user. What should the administrator check first? A. Whether Microsoft Graph has indexed the user's OneDrive files, because Copilot access depends on file indexing completion before licensing applies. B. Whether a communication compliance policy includes the user, because Copilot is disabled until communications are reviewed. C. Whether the user has a conflicting or missing prerequisite license or service plan that prevents the Copilot license from being assigned successfully. D. Whether the user has created at least one saved prompt, because Copilot licenses are activated only after prompt management is configured. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Whether the user has a conflicting or missing prerequisite license or service plan that prevents the Copilot license from being assigned successfully. With group-based licensing, a user can be in the correct group but still fail license assignment if there is a licensing conflict, missing prerequisite, disabled service plan, usage location issue, or another assignment error. The administrator should inspect the license assignment error and prerequisites for that user. Exam clue. For group-based licensing questions, membership alone is not enough. If a specific user has a license assignment error, check prerequisites, conflicts, service plans, usage location, or other license assignment details before troubleshooting unrelated Copilot features. Question 17. A finance manager asks Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize files related to a confidential budget project. The manager can open some project files in SharePoint, but not the executive-only folder that contains board materials. What should the administrator expect Copilot to include in the response? A. Only content the finance manager is permitted to access through Microsoft 365 permissions. B. All files in the SharePoint site, because Copilot uses Microsoft Graph to bypass folder-level permissions for better summaries. C. Only files that have sensitivity labels, because unlabeled files are excluded from Copilot grounding. D. The executive-only folder if the manager mentions the folder name in the prompt. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Only content the finance manager is permitted to access through Microsoft 365 permissions. Microsoft 365 Copilot uses Microsoft 365 data and relationships while respecting the signed-in user's existing permissions. If the finance manager cannot access the executive-only folder directly, Copilot should not use that restricted content in the manager's response. Exam clue. For Copilot data access questions, anchor on the signed-in user's permissions. Copilot can ground on accessible work data, but prompts, graph, and labels do not override Microsoft 365 access boundaries. Question 18. A department wants team members to reuse a standard prompt that asks Copilot to summarize weekly project updates in the same format. The administrator wants to make this reusable starting point available without creating a managed custom agent. Proposed solution. Save and share the prompt with the department. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Yes. Saving and sharing a prompt is appropriate when the requirement is to give users a reusable starting instruction or format for Copilot interactions. The scenario does not require a managed agent with configured knowledge sources, scoped access, or lifecycle approval. Exam clue. For prompt management questions, separate reusable starting instructions from managed custom agents. Saved share prompts standardize how users ask Copilot. Agents provide a configured assistant with knowledge, access, and lifecycle controls. Question 19. A company is enabling Microsoft 365 Copilot and wants to reduce the chance that sensitive project information appears in responses for users who should not work with that information. Which two actions are most directly aligned with this goal? A. Require users to confirm that they have reviewed Copilot responses before sharing them externally. B. Review SharePoint sites and overshared content by using data access governance capabilities. C. Use Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies to detect and help protect sensitive information. D. Limit the initial Copilot rollout to a pilot group while leaving existing file permissions unchanged. E. Use a standard saved prompt that tells Copilot to avoid sensitive project names. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Review SharePoint sites and overshared content by using data access governance capabilities. C. Use Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies to detect and help protect sensitive information. Reviewing SharePoint oversharing and data access governance findings helps identify content that too many users can access, which matters because Copilot respects existing Microsoft 365 permissions. DLP policies can detect sensitive information and apply protective actions, helping reduce the risk of sensitive data exposure. Exam clue. For Copilot data exposure, look for controls that address the data and access layer, DLP, sensitivity/protection, and SharePoint/data access governance. User reminders, pilot scope, and prompt wording are partial measures, not direct governance controls. Question 20. A project team works in Microsoft Teams. Members upload files to a standard channel and co-author those files during meetings. A new administrator asks where the channel files are stored. What should you tell the administrator? A. The files are stored in a SharePoint document library connected to the team. B. The files are stored in each channel member's OneDrive, then synchronized to Teams. C. The files are stored in Exchange Online because Teams conversations use mail-enabled groups. D. The files are stored in Microsoft Entra because team membership is managed there. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. The files are stored in a SharePoint document library connected to the team. Files shared in standard Teams channels are stored in the SharePoint site connected to the team, typically in a document library folder for that channel. Users work with the files through Teams, but SharePoint provides the underlying file storage. Exam clue. For Microsoft 365 object questions, Teams channel files map to SharePoint, chat or shared personal files map to OneDrive, mailbox and calendar map to Exchange, and identity and groups map to Entra. Question 21. Match each governance requirement to the most appropriate Microsoft Purview capability. A. Microsoft Purview eDiscovery. B. Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. C. Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management. D. Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are 1. D. Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI. 2. B. Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. 3. C. Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management. 4. A. Microsoft Purview eDiscovery. DSPM for AI helps discover, assess, and manage AI-related data security risks. DLP helps warn or block sensitive information sharing in supported locations such as Teams and Exchange. Insider Risk Management helps detect and investigate risky user activity patterns. eDiscovery supports legal or regulatory search, preservation, review, and export workflows. Exam clue. For Purview governance questions, map the job to the tool. AI Data Exposure Posture means DSPM for AI. Warn or block sensitive sharing means DLP. Risky user behavior means Insider Risk Management. Legal investigation means eDiscovery. Question 22. A company is reviewing its Microsoft 365 compliance posture before expanding Copilot. The Compliance Manager wants a tool that helps assess current controls, track improvement actions, and view recommendations for meeting compliance obligations. The team understands that separate configuration may still be needed to enforce policies such as DLP or sensitivity labeling. Which Microsoft Purview capability best fits this assessment and recommendation requirement? A. Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. B. Microsoft Purview Audit. C. Microsoft Purview Sensitivity Labels. D. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager helps organizations assess compliance posture, track improvement actions, and review recommendations for compliance obligations. It supports assessment and improvement planning. It does not replace configuring enforcement controls. Exam clue. When the requirement is assess compliance posture, review recommendations, and track improvement actions, think Compliance Manager. When the requirement is to actually enforce a policy, choose the specific enforcement control, like DLP or sensitivity labels. Question 23. A project team in Microsoft Teams needs to collaborate with a consultant from another organization. The consultant should be able to participate in the team and access only the team resources they are explicitly granted. Which Microsoft 365 concept best supports this requirement? A. Create a shared mailbox for the consultant so the project team can send files and meeting notes to one external address. B. Use Microsoft Entra Guest User / B2B collaboration so the consultant can be granted scoped access to the team and its connected resources. C. Add the consultant's personal email address to every SharePoint file or folder used by the project team. D. Create a separate internal user account for the consultant and assign broad department group membership. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Use Microsoft Entra Guest User, B2B collaboration, so the consultant can be granted scoped access to the team and its connected resources. Microsoft Entra B2B collaboration allows an external user to be represented as a guest user in the tenant. The guest can be granted access to specific teams, Microsoft 365 groups, SharePoint sites, or other resources, while remaining governed by Microsoft 365 permissions and collaboration controls. Exam clue. For external collaboration in Teams or SharePoint, think Microsoft Entra Guest Users, B2B collaboration. Avoid broad internal accounts or ad hoc file-by-file sharing when the requirement is scoped collaboration in a team workspace. Question 24. A confidential strategy document in SharePoint has a sensitivity label that applies encryption and restricts access to members of the executive group. A marketing manager asks Copilot to summarize the document, but the manager is not in the executive group. What should the administrator expect? A. Copilot can summarize the document because sensitivity labels only affect downloads, not Copilot grounding. B. Copilot can summarize the document if the manager knows the exact file name and includes it in the prompt. C. Copilot should not use the document in the manager's response because the label's protection restricts access. D. Copilot removes the sensitivity label from the document before generating a summary. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Copilot should not use the document in the manager's response because the label's protection restricts access. Sensitivity labels can apply protection such as encryption and access restrictions. Microsoft 365 Copilot respects the user's access to protected content. So, if the manager is not permitted to open the labeled document, Copilot should not use that document in the manager's response. Exam clue. For sensitivity label questions, remember, labels can classify and protect content. Copilot does not bypass label-based protection or Microsoft 365 permissions just because a user asks for the content. Question 25. A company is preparing for a Microsoft 365 Copilot and agent administration rollout. Before expanding admin responsibilities, the security team wants to reduce standing privileged access and identify recommended identity security improvements in the tenant. Which two actions best support these goals? A. Publish a custom agent to all administrators so they can ask questions about privileged role assignments. B. Configure eligible administrative role assignments with Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management where appropriate. C. Create a Microsoft Purview retention label for administrator mailbox messages. D. Review Microsoft Entra recommendations or Secure Score guidance to identify identity security posture improvements. E. Enable public web grounding so administrators can compare tenant settings with public documentation. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Configure eligible administrative role assignments with Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management where appropriate. D. Review Microsoft Entra recommendations or Secure Score guidance to identify identity security posture improvements. Microsoft Entra recommendations and Secure Score style guidance help administrators identify identity posture improvements and prioritized security actions. Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management supports least privilege by reducing standing access and allowing eligible, time-bound privileged role activation. Exam clue. For least privilege admin readiness, look for controls that improve identity security posture and reduce standing privileged access. Recommendations, or Secure Score guidance, plus PIM are the key pair. Question 26. A department repeatedly asks Copilot to summarize weekly project status updates in a specific format. The department wants a reusable starting point that team members can use, but they do not need a managed agent with its own knowledge sources, publishing lifecycle, or access configuration. Proposed solution. Create and share a reusable prompt with the department. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Yes. A reusable shared prompt is appropriate when users need a consistent starting instruction for Copilot, but do not need a managed custom agent with configured knowledge sources, instructions, testing, publishing, or audience controls. Exam clue. If the requirement is only reuse this instruction or prompt, think shared prompt. If the requirement adds approved knowledge, instructions, tools, activity, lifecycle, or scoped audience, think custom agent. Question 27. A department creates a new Microsoft Teams team for a product launch. The team uses standard channels for planning conversations and stores launch documents in the Channel Files tab. A new administrator needs to understand which underlying Microsoft 365 resources support this workspace. Which statement best describes the relationship? A. The team stores standard channel files directly in Microsoft Entra ID because group membership is managed there. B. The team stores channel files in each user's OneDrive by default, and the team's owner controls access by sharing each file individually. C. The team is backed by a Microsoft 365 group, and standard channel files are stored in the connected SharePoint site. D. The team is backed only by Exchange Online, and all channel files are stored as mailbox attachments. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. The team is backed by a Microsoft 365 group, and standard channel files are stored in the connected SharePoint site. A Microsoft Teams team is connected to a Microsoft 365 group, and standard channel files are stored in the team's connected SharePoint site. The group helps provide membership and the shared Microsoft 365 workspace behind the team. Exam clue. For Teams workspace object map questions, remember the chain: team to Microsoft 365 group to SharePoint site for standard channel files. Entra manages identity. Exchange supports group, mailbox, calendar. OneDrive is not the default storage for standard channel files. Question 28. Match each Microsoft 365 governance requirement to the most appropriate Microsoft Purview capability. A. Retention labels and retention policies. B. Communication compliance. C. Data loss prevention policies. D. Sensitivity labels. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are 1. C. Data loss prevention policies. 2. A. Retention labels and retention policies. 3. D. Sensitivity labels. 4. B. Communication compliance. Data loss prevention policies help detect and prevent sensitive information from being shared. Retention controls keep and delete records according to policy. Sensitivity labels classify and protect content, including encryption or access restrictions. Communication Compliance detects and supports review of risky or policy-violating communications. Exam clue. For Purview matching questions, anchor on the verb. Prevent sharing equals DLP. Keep or delete equals retention. Classify or protect equals sensitivity labels. And detect risky communications equals communication compliance. Question 29. A company is preparing to expand Microsoft 365 Copilot. Before rollout, the compliance team wants to identify sensitive files that may be exposed through AI experiences, understand where risky data is located, and prioritize remediation before more users begin using Copilot. Which Microsoft Purview capability best fits this requirement? A. Microsoft Purview eDiscovery. B. Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance. C. Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI. D. Microsoft Purview Retention Labels and Policies. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI. Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI helps organizations discover, assess, and manage AI-related data security risks. It is the best fit when the requirement is to find and prioritize sensitive data exposure risks connected to AI experiences before expanding Copilot. Exam clue. When the scenario says AI-related data exposure, discover risky sensitive content and prioritize remediation before Copilot expansion, think DSPM for AI. Legal investigation is eDiscovery. Risky communications review is communication compliance. Keep/delete lifecycle is retention. Question 30. An HR operations team wants to roll out a custom agent that answers employee questions from approved HR policy documents. The agent should be tested with a small pilot group before it is made available to the full HR operations group. Arrange the actions in the best order. A. Publish or share the agent with the full HR operations group. B. Add the approved HR policy documents as the agent's knowledge source. C. Test the agent with a small pilot group and review feedback. D. Update the agent instructions or knowledge configuration based on pilot feedback. E. Define the agent's purpose, audience, and expected response boundaries. Lock in your answer. The correct order is 1. E. Define the agent's purpose, audience, and expected response boundaries. 2. B. Add the approved HR policy documents as the agent's knowledge source. 3. C. Test the agent with a small pilot group and review feedback. 4. D. Update the agent instructions or knowledge configuration based on pilot feedback. 5. A. Publish or share the agent with the full HR operations group. Define the agent scope first. Add approved HR policy documents as the grounding knowledge source. Test with a small pilot group. Update the agent based on feedback and then publish or share it with the intended HR operations audience. Exam clue. For custom agent rollout order questions, look for the lifecycle, define scope, add approved knowledge, pilot test, refine, then publish, share to the intended audience. Question 31. A user asks Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize recent work activity for a customer account. The response includes information from the user's accessible emails, calendar events, Teams conversations, and files in Microsoft 365. What enables Copilot to ground the response across those Microsoft 365 work items? A. Microsoft Search, because it indexes Microsoft 365 content and by itself provides the complete cross-service relationship layer for Copilot responses. B. Microsoft Graph Connectors, because they are required before Copilot can use emails, meetings, Teams conversations, and SharePoint files from Microsoft 365. C. The Microsoft Purview Audit Log, because it records user and admin activities, and Copilot uses that log as the primary source for work summaries. D. Microsoft Graph, because it connects Microsoft 365 data, relationships, and context that the user is permitted to access. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D, Microsoft Graph, because it connects Microsoft 365 data, relationships, and context that the user is permitted to access. Microsoft Graph is the data and relationship layer across Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 Copilot uses graph-grounded work data within the user's permissions to help answer questions involving emails, meetings, chats, files, people, and related work context. Exam clue. When the question mentions Copilot using emails, meetings, Teams conversations, files, people, and relationships across Microsoft 365, think Microsoft Graph. Search, connectors, and audit logs are adjacent admin concepts, but they are not the core Copilot work data relationship layer. Question 32. A company is preparing a phased Microsoft 365 Copilot rollout. The administrator wants to make Copilot available to a pilot group first, while also reducing the risk that the pilot users can retrieve sensitive SharePoint content that was accidentally shared too broadly. Which two actions should the administrator take? A. Create a Purview Audit search for Copilot prompts and use it as the primary access control boundary. B. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses only to the pilot users or a pilot licensing group. C. Move all sensitive SharePoint files to users' personal OneDrive folders so Copilot cannot reference them. D. Disable Microsoft Graph for the pilot group so Copilot cannot use Microsoft 365 work data. E. Review SharePoint permissions and remove broad access where sensitive content is overshared. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses only to the pilot users or a pilot licensing group. E. Review SharePoint permissions and remove broad access where sensitive content is overshared. Licensing or group-based licensing controls which users can access Microsoft 365 Copilot during a phased rollout. Copilot also respects the user's Microsoft 365 permissions, so reviewing and remediating overshared SharePoint permissions directly reduces sensitive content exposure. Exam clue. For safe Copilot rollout questions, separate who gets Copilot from what those users can access. Licenses or pilot groups scope availability, while SharePoint/Teams permissions and sensitivity protection govern content access. Question 33. A company's legal team must investigate a dispute involving several employees. They need to search for relevant email, Teams messages, and SharePoint documents, preserve potentially relevant content, and export collected results for legal review. Proposed solution. Use Microsoft Purview eDiscovery to create a case, search relevant Microsoft 365 locations, place content on hold when required, and export review results. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Yes. Microsoft Purview eDiscovery is designed for legal and regulatory investigation workflows. It can support cases, searches across Microsoft 365 content locations, preservation or holds when required, review, and export of collected results. Exam clue. When the scenario says legal investigation, search, preserve, review, or export, think eDiscovery. When it says warn or block sensitive sharing, think DLP. Question 34. A sales team wants help drafting emails, summarizing meetings, and finding information across the team members' accessible Microsoft 365 work data. The team does not need a separate assistant with its own configured knowledge sources, custom instructions, or publishing lifecycle. What should the administrator recommend? A. Build a custom agent with a dedicated SharePoint knowledge source and publish it to the sales team. B. Use Microsoft 365 Copilot in the existing Microsoft 365 apps and work context. C. Create a Microsoft Graph connector before users can ask about their Exchange, Teams, and SharePoint content. D. Configure communication compliance policies so Copilot can generate sales summaries from monitored conversations. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Use Microsoft 365 Copilot in the existing Microsoft 365 apps and work context. Built-in Microsoft 365 Copilot experiences are appropriate when users need assistance across their accessible Microsoft 365 work data in apps such as Outlook, Teams, Word, and related work contexts. The scenario does not require a custom agent with dedicated knowledge, instructions, or publishing. Exam clue. If the requirement is general productivity across accessible Microsoft 365 work data, think built-in Microsoft 365 Copilot. If the requirement includes custom instructions, approved knowledge sources, tools, operators, or scoped publishing, think custom agent. Question 35. A company is strengthening Microsoft 365 administrative access before expanding Copilot and agent administration. Administrators should not be trusted only because they are on the corporate network, and privileged access should be limited to what is needed for each role. Which two actions best support these zero-trust aligned goals? A. Require multi-factor authentication and appropriate conditional access controls for administrative sign-ins. B. Assign only the administrative roles needed for each administrator's job responsibilities. C. Use Microsoft Defender XDR incident queues to review security alerts after privileged activity occurs. D. Review Microsoft Purview Audit logs for administrator activity during monthly compliance reviews. E. Require administrators to connect from a managed corporate device, but grant all administrators the same broad admin role set. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A. Require multi-factor authentication and appropriate conditional access controls for administrative sign-ins. B. Assign only the administrative roles needed for each administrator's job responsibilities. Zero Trust emphasizes verifying explicitly, which includes strong authentication and conditional access decisions rather than trusting network location alone. Least privilege means administrators should receive only the roles and permissions they need for their responsibilities. Exam clue. For Zero Trust admin access, look for controls that enforce verify explicitly and least privilege. Monitoring and investigation help, but they do not replace strong sign-in controls and role scoping. Question 36. A legal operations team wants to publish a custom agent that helps employees answer questions about contract review procedures. The agent must use only approved legal policy documents in SharePoint, must not answer from public web content, and must be available only to the legal operations group. The team also wants to test the agent with 5 reviewers before wider legal operations availability. Which approach best meets the requirements? A. Create a shared prompt that tells Copilot to use legal policies only. Share the prompt with the legal operations group and ask users not to reference public sources. B. Publish the agent to the whole organization first. Rely on Microsoft 365 permissions to hide legal files from non-legal users and review audit logs after employees begin using it. C. Create the agent with the approved SharePoint policy documents as its knowledge source. Keep public web grounding disabled, test it with the reviewer group, and then publish or share it only to the legal operations group. D. Enable public web grounding so the agent can compare internal policies with current legal websites, then restrict the SharePoint site to the 5 reviewers during testing. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create the agent with the approved SharePoint policy documents as its knowledge source. Keep public web grounding disabled, test it with the reviewer group, and then publish or share it only to the legal operations group. This option satisfies all requirements. Approved SharePoint documents provide the intended internal knowledge source. Disabling public web grounding helps keep the agent from answering from public web content. Testing with a small reviewer group supports validation, and publishing only to the legal operations group enforces the intended audience scope. Exam clue. For hard custom agent governance questions, check all constraints: approved knowledge source, grounding boundary, test group, and final audience scope. The best answer must satisfy every constraint, not just 1 or 2. Question 37. A company is preparing a tenant-wide Microsoft 365 Copilot rollout. A risk review finds 3 issues. Some confidential SharePoint sites grant access to broad department groups. Sensitive files are inconsistently classified and protected. And the compliance team wants to detect attempted sharing of customer account numbers in Teams chats and Exchange email. Which 3 actions should the organization prioritize? A. Use Purview Audit searches as the primary control to prevent customer account numbers from being shared. B. Review and remediate broad SharePoint permissions on confidential sites. C. Enable public web grounding so Copilot can compare internal files against external sources. D. Configure Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies for customer account numbers in Teams and Exchange. E. Increase Microsoft 365 Copilot license assignments so all users have consistent access. F. Apply Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels to classify and protect sensitive files. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Review and remediate broad SharePoint permissions on confidential sites. D. Configure Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies for customer account numbers in Teams and Exchange. F. Apply Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels to classify and protect sensitive files. The 3 findings require 3 complementary controls. Permission remediation addresses overshared confidential SharePoint sites. Sensitivity labels classify and protect sensitive files, including protection such as encryption or access restrictions when configured. Data loss prevention policies are the preventive control for detecting and helping prevent sensitive information, such as customer account numbers, from being shared in Teams and Exchange. Exam clue. When the scenario lists multiple risk findings, match each finding to a control: overshared sites to permission cleanup, unclassified sensitive files to sensitivity labels, and prevent sensitive sharing to DLP. Question 38. Match each administration requirement to the most appropriate control or configuration area. A. Agent sharing or publishing scope. B. Microsoft Purview Audit. C. Microsoft 365 Copilot license assignment or group-based licensing. D. Agent knowledge source configuration. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are 1. C. Microsoft 365 Copilot license assignment or group-based licensing. 2. D. Agent knowledge source configuration. 3. A. Agent sharing or publishing scope. 4. B. Microsoft Purview Audit. Copilot license assignment or group-based licensing scopes: who gets Microsoft 365 Copilot during a phased rollout? Agent knowledge source configuration controls the approved content the agent is grounded in. Agent sharing or publishing scope controls who can use the agent after testing. Microsoft Purview Audit supports investigation of user and admin activity after an incident. Exam clue. Separate the four admin levers. Copilot availability equals licensing. Agent grounding equals knowledge source. Agent audience equals sharing or publishing scope. Incident investigation equals audit. Question 39. After a Microsoft 365 Copilot pilot, a manager reports that Copilot summarized details from a confidential planning document. Investigation shows that the pilot user could open the document directly in SharePoint because the site was shared with a broad department group years earlier. What should the administrator do first to reduce this type of risk? A. Disable Microsoft 365 Copilot for the pilot user, because Copilot bypassed the document's SharePoint permissions. B. Remove or narrow the broad SharePoint access so only users with a business need can open the confidential document. C. Enable Microsoft Purview Audit so future Copilot summaries are automatically blocked when they include confidential information. D. Create a Microsoft Graph connector for the SharePoint site so Copilot uses a separate controlled index instead of the original site permissions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Remove or narrow the broad SharePoint access, so only users with a business need can open the confidential document. Copilot did not bypass permissions if the pilot user could open the document directly in SharePoint. The risk is that the SharePoint site was overshared. The first corrective action is to remediate the underlying permissions, so only users with a business need can access the confidential document. Exam clue. If Copilot surfaces content the user can already open, the root problem is usually permissions or sharing scope, not Copilot bypassing security. Fix the source permissions first. Question 40. A company wants to reduce standing administrative access in Microsoft 365. Global administrator access should be available only when an approved administrator needs it for a limited time, and the activation should require approval and multi-factor authentication. Propose solution. Configure Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management so eligible administrators can activate the global administrator role only when needed, with approval, MFA, and time-limited activation. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Yes. Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management supports just-in-time privileged role activation. It can make administrators eligible for privileged roles instead of permanently active, and activation can require controls such as approval, multi-factor authentication, justification, and time limits. Exam clue. When the requirement says reduce standing admin access, eligible role, activate when needed, approval, or time-limited privileged access, think privileged identity management. Question 41. A company is deploying Microsoft 365 Copilot and strengthening Microsoft Purview governance. The HR and legal teams want to identify and review employee communications that may contain harassment, threats, or policy violations in Teams and Exchange. They do not want to block messages based on sensitive information types, and they are not asking to preserve records for a fixed retention period. Which Microsoft Purview capability best fits this requirement? A. Data loss prevention policies. B. Communication compliance. C. Retention labels and retention policies. D. Sensitivity labels. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Communication compliance. Communication compliance helps organizations detect, capture, and review messages that may violate workplace policies, such as harassment, threats, or other risky communications. It is the best fit when the requirement is policy violation review of communications. Exam clue. For Purview governance questions, key off the action. Review risky communications equals communication compliance. Prevent sensitive sharing equals DLP. Keep delete records equals retention. Classify protect content equals sensitivity labels. Question 42. A pilot group reports that a custom HR policy agent sometimes answers from outdated draft documents and is visible to more users than intended. The owner must correct the agent before expanding availability. Arrange the actions in the best order. A. Publish the corrected agent to the intended HR operations group. B. Update the agent's knowledge sources to include only approved current HR policy documents. C. Review pilot feedback and identify which responses came from outdated or unauthorized sources. D. Test the corrected agent again with the pilot group. E. Adjust the agent sharing or publishing scope so only the intended pilot users can access it during validation. Lock in your answer. The correct order is 1. C. Review pilot feedback and identify which responses came from outdated or unauthorized sources. 2. B. Update the agent's knowledge sources to include only approved current HR policy documents. 3. E. Adjust the agent sharing or publishing scope so only the intended pilot users can access it during validation. 4. D. Test the corrected agent again with the pilot group. 5. A. Publish the corrected agent to the intended HR operations group. The owner should first diagnose the pilot feedback, then correct the agent grounding by using only approved current HR policy documents, correct the audience scope during validation, retest with the pilot group, and only then publish to the intended HR operations group. Exam clue. For hard agent lifecycle sequence questions, avoid jumping straight to publish. Diagnose feedback, correct grounding, correct audience scope, retest, and then publish. Question 43. A director asks Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize all documents related to a confidential acquisition project. The director has access to the project Teams team and its standard channel files, but does not have access to a separate executive-only SharePoint site that contains board documents for the same project. What should the administrator expect Copilot to include in the response? A. The executive-only board documents if the director mentions the exact project name in the prompt. B. All acquisition-related documents across the tenant, because Microsoft Graph connects related content even when the user lacks direct access. C. Only content the director is permitted to access through Microsoft 365, such as the Teams team and standard channel files, but not the executive-only SharePoint site. D. The executive-only board documents as redacted summaries, because Copilot can summarize protected content without exposing the original files. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Only content the director is permitted to access through Microsoft 365, such as the Teams team and standard channel files, but not the executive-only SharePoint site. Microsoft 365 Copilot uses Microsoft Graph grounded work data within the user's existing permissions. The director can receive information from Teams and SharePoint content they are allowed to access, but Copilot should not use documents from the executive-only SharePoint site if the director lacks permission to open them. Exam clue. For Copilot response boundary questions, combine two ideas. Graph provides the work context, but permissions decide what the user can access. Graph connection is not permission elevation. Question 44. An administrator is reviewing Microsoft Entra objects for a third-party SaaS application that users access with Microsoft Entra single sign-on. The admin sees an app registration used by the application developer and an enterprise application in the tenant where users are assigned access. Which two statements are accurate? A. The app registration and enterprise application are the same object and always have identical tenant-specific assignments. B. The enterprise application represents the tenant local service principal used to manage the application instance, assignments, and access in the organization's tenant. C. The enterprise application is a Microsoft Purview object that applies retention settings to the SaaS application's data. D. The app registration represents the application definition, such as the app's identity, redirect URIs, and API permissions configured by the application owner. E. The app registration is created only after every user has been assigned the application in the tenant. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. The enterprise application represents the tenant local service principal used to manage the application instance, assignments, and access in the organization's tenant. D. The app registration represents the application definition, such as the app's identity, redirect URIs, and API permissions configured by the application owner. An app registration defines the application identity and configuration, such as redirect URIs, credentials, API permissions, and related application settings. An enterprise application represents the service principal instance in a tenant and is used for tenant-specific management, such as user assignment, access, and SSO configuration. Exam clue. For Microsoft Entra application questions, separate the application definition from the tenant instance. App registration means application object/configure refusal. Enterprise application, or service principal, means tenant local instance for access and assignment. Question 45. A company wants to reduce the chance that employees accidentally share customer tax identification numbers in Teams chats or exchange email before expanding Microsoft 365 Copilot to all users. Proposed solution. Create Microsoft Purview Audit searches that compliance reviewers run weekly to find messages containing customer tax identification numbers. Does the proposed solution meet the requirement? A. Yes. B. No. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. No. Microsoft Purview Audit helps investigate activity after it occurs. Weekly audit searches can help reviewers discover possible incidents, but they do not act as the preventive control for warning, blocking, or enforcing policy when users attempt to share sensitive information in Teams or Exchange. Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies are the better fit for that preventive requirement. Exam clue. For sensitive information sharing, distinguish preventive enforcement from after-the-fact investigation. Prevent or warn block equals DLP. Investigate what happened equals audit. Question 46. A custom HR benefits agent has been tested and published to the HR operations group. After 2 weeks, the owner wants to understand whether employees are using the agent, identify answer quality issues, and decide whether the agent's instructions or knowledge sources need improvement. What should the owner do next? A. Review the agent's usage and operational insights, examine feedback or answer quality signals, and update the agent's instructions or knowledge sources based on the findings. B. Review Microsoft 365 Copilot license assignment and adoption reports for the HR operations group. Then compare the results with the list of users who were given access to the agent. C. Review Microsoft Purview audit records for access to the SharePoint policy documents used by the agent. Then look for changes in how often those documents are opened by HR users. D. Send a feedback form to HR users asking whether the agent's answers were helpful. Then use the responses to identify common issues reported by the pilot audience. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Review the agent's usage and operational insights, examine feedback or answer quality signals, and update the agent's instructions or knowledge sources based on the findings. After an agent is published, the owner should use the agent's usage, operational, feedback, and answer quality signals to evaluate whether the agent is being adopted and whether it needs improvement. Those findings can then guide updates to the agent's instructions, knowledge sources, or configuration. Exam clue. For post-publishing agent administration, choose the answer that uses agent-specific usage, feedback, and quality signals to drive lifecycle improvements. General licensing, file access, or survey data can help, but they are not the full agent monitoring picture. Question 47. A company is explaining Microsoft 365 Copilot behavior to business leaders. Leaders want to understand why Copilot can summarize some work content for a user, but not other related content. Which two statements are accurate? A. Public web grounding gives Copilot permission to retrieve private Microsoft 365 documents from restricted SharePoint sites. B. Microsoft Graph helps Copilot use work context from Microsoft 365 data and relationships. C. Copilot can use SharePoint documents that the user is not permitted to open if the documents are relevant to the prompt. D. Sensitivity labels always make labeled files invisible to Copilot, even when the user has permission to open the files. E. Teams standard channel files are commonly stored in the SharePoint site associated with the team. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Microsoft Graph helps Copilot use work context from Microsoft 365 data and relationships. E. Teams standard channel files are commonly stored in the SharePoint site associated with the team. Microsoft Graph provides the work context layer across Microsoft 365 data, relationships, and activities that Copilot can use within the user's permission boundary. Teams' standard channel files are stored in the SharePoint site associated with the team, so SharePoint permissions and team/site structure affect content availability. Exam clue. For Copilot behavior, remember, Graph supplies work context, permissions limit access, and Teams files often live in SharePoint. Relevance, labels, or public web grounding do not override access permissions. Question 48. Match each governance requirement to the most appropriate Microsoft Purview capability. A. Retention labels and retention policies. B. Data loss prevention policies. C. Communication compliance. D. Sensitivity labels. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are 1. B. Data loss prevention policies. 2. D. Sensitivity labels. 3. A. Retention labels and retention policies. 4. C. Communication compliance. DLP policies help detect and prevent sensitive information from being shared in Teams, Exchange, and other supported locations. Sensitivity labels classify content and can apply protection, such as encryption or access restrictions. Retention labels and retention policies control how long content is retained and when it is deleted. Communication compliance supports detection and review of risky or policy-violating employee communications. Exam clue. For Purview matching questions, map the verb to the tool. Warn, block, sharing equals DLP. Classify, protect equals sensitivity labels. Keep, delete equals retention. Review risky communications equals communication compliance. Question 49. A company is preparing a Copilot administration plan. The admin team has two separate requirements. Make Microsoft 365 Copilot available only to users in the approved rollout group. Control which users can use pay-as-you-go Copilot experiences that bill through the organization's configured billing policy. Which two actions best address these requirements? A. Use Microsoft Purview eDiscovery to export Copilot usage data before assigning licenses or configuring billing policies. B. Configure a pay-as-you-go billing policy that scopes eligible pay-as-you-go Copilot usage to the intended users or group. C. Enable public web grounding so pay-as-you-go Copilot usage is separated from licensed Microsoft 365 Copilot usage. D. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the approved rollout group, or use group-based licensing for that group. E. Create a Microsoft Purview retention policy so Copilot license assignment and pay-as-you-go usage are governed by the same lifecycle rule. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Configure a pay-as-you-go billing policy that scopes eligible pay-as-you-go Copilot usage to the intended users or group. D. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the approved rollout group, or use group-based licensing for that group. Microsoft 365 Copilot availability for the approved rollout group is controlled through user or group-based license assignment. Pay-as-you-go Copilot experiences are controlled separately through a billing policy that scopes who can use those metered experiences. Exam clue. For Copilot administration, keep these separate. Microsoft 365 Copilot access equals license assignment. Metered or pay-as-you-go Copilot usage equals billing policy scope. Question 50. A company has completed a Microsoft 365 Copilot and custom agent pilot. Before expanding to more departments, the admin team must confirm that sensitive content exposure has been reduced. The custom agent uses only approved sources, and rollout access is limited to the next approved department group. Arrange the actions in the best order. A. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the next approved department group. B. Review pilot findings and identify permission, sensitivity labeling, DLP, and agent grounding gaps. C. Validate the corrected Copilot and agent experience with a small reviewer group. D. Remediate broad SharePoint permissions and apply or update sensitivity labels for sensitive content. E. Update the custom agent's knowledge sources and sharing scope so it uses approved content and is available only to the intended audience. F. Configure or confirm DLP policies for sensitive information in Teams and Exchange. Lock in your answer. The correct order is 1. B. Review pilot findings and identify permission, sensitivity labeling, DLP, and agent grounding gaps. 2. D. Remediate broad SharePoint permissions and apply or update sensitivity labels for sensitive content. 3. F. Configure or confirm DLP policies for sensitive information in Teams and Exchange. 4. E. Update the custom agent's knowledge sources and sharing scope so it uses approved content and is available only to the intended audience. 5. C. Validate the corrected Copilot and agent experience with a small reviewer group. 6. A. Assign Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the next approved department group. The admin team should diagnose pilot gaps first, correct data access and protection risks, confirm preventive DLP controls, correct custom agent grounding and audience scope, validate the corrected experience with reviewers, and only then expand Copilot licensing to the next approved department group. Exam clue. For final rollout sequencing, avoid expand first, fix later. The safe sequence is diagnose pilot gaps, fix data permissions/protection, confirm DLP, fix agent grounding/audience, validate, Then expand licensing. If you missed questions today, that is useful feedback, not failure. Review the patterns: identity and Microsoft 365 objects, Purview controls, Copilot rollout, and agent governance. Those patterns matter more than memorizing a single wording of a single question. Thanks for studying with Cert Lab and WebLizard. If this helped, keep practicing with the source-backed explanations, revisit the questions you missed, and keep building confidence for AB-900.